When Colleen Whitfield counted 63 cents from the bottom of her coin purse and placed them one by one into the open palm of her own sister-in-law, she was not paying rent. She was purchasing the right to exist inside a rusted aluminum box on a quarter-acre of mud, while the woman collecting the coins looked down at her with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been waiting years for this exact arrangement of power. 42 years old, two daughters, three cardboard boxes, and a coin purse that was now empty. That was everything Colleen Whitfield had to show for a life she had built with her hands and lost through no fault of her own. People in Harlan County heard about it within the week. A few of them laughed. A few of them shook their heads. Most of them decided it was none of their business and went back to their own kitchens and their own problems because Harlan County, Kentucky had enough of those to go around. But what none of them knew, what Colleen herself could not have imagined on the afternoon she pressed those coins into Darlene Pratt's palm, was that beneath the floorboards of that trailer lay something that had been waiting 40 years to be found. Something that would turn 63 cents into the first line of a story no one in that town saw coming. Before we go any further, if you believe that starting over is never the same as starting from nothing, you are in the right place. Every week on this channel, we share the stories that prove life's best chapters are the ones nobody planned. Subscribe now, and let's walk this road together. Now, let us begin. The house on Dogwood Lane had been theirs for 11 years. Colleen knew it the way a person knows a body of water. They have swum in since childhood. Not just the surface, but the depth, the temperature at different times of day. The places where the current pulled and the places where it was still. She knew the kitchen drawer that swelled shut in August when the humidity climbed above 80 and the whole house seemed to exhale moisture. She knew the third stair from the bottom, the one that groaned like an old dog no matter how carefully you placed your weight. And she had learned during the years when the girls were small and sleeping light to skip that stair, entirely stepping from the second to the fourth with a precision that had become automatic. She had painted the girls' bedroom twice. Once a pale green when Nora was born, because Colleen's mother had said green was the color of growing things, and a child's room should feel like growth. Once a warm cream 4 years later, when Birdie arrived and Nora, who was 5, and had developed opinions about color, with the intensity of someone discovering a new continent, declared that the green was babyish, and she required something more serious. Cream was the compromise. It had lasted. She left the cream walls behind. She left the oak table in the kitchen that she had found at an estate sale in Whitesburg in the spring of 2014. The one with the water ring on the left side that she had covered with a ceramic bowl of dried lavender, because sanding it out required a free Saturday that never materialized. She left the curtains in the living room, Keats. The ones she had chosen from a catalog on a January afternoon when choosing curtains had been the only decision available to her that did not involve someone else's opinion and had therefore felt like freedom. She left most things because most things had been acquired with money that was partly hers and partly not. And Colleen Whitfield was the kind of woman who did not take what was not cleanly hers, even when what was not cleanly hers had been earned on the back of years she was not going to get back. There was a dignity in leaving without argument. She had decided this early the way she decided things, by sitting with the question until the answer arrived and then committing to it completely. She was 42. She had a 14-year-old daughter named Nora, who processed the world in silence before she responded to it, and a 9-year-old daughter named Birdie, who processed the world out loud and at considerable volume, and a rolling suitcase, and 3 cardboard boxes and a checking account that contained exactly enough to cover the final month of utilities on a house she would no longer be living in, and nothing beyond that. The divorce had been finalized on a Wednesday in early June. By Friday morning, she was packed. Curtis had left 6 weeks before the paperwork was complete. He had packed 2 bags on a Tuesday evening, with the efficiency of a man who had already rehearsed the departure in his mind and was now simply executing it. And he had driven 12 miles to his mother's place in Pikeville with the ease of someone returning to a room that had been kept ready. He had not fought for the house. He had not fought for much of anything, which Colleen understood was not generosity but indifference. The particular cruelty of a man who does not care enough about what he is leaving to argue over it. He called the girls on Sundays, sometimes. He had called 3 times in 6 weeks. He had not called the previous Sunday, which Nora had not mentioned, and which Birdie had mentioned twice, once at breakfast, and once at bedtime, and then gone quiet in the way a 9-year-old goes quiet when she is learning that some disappointments do not improve by being discussed. Colleen had watched Birdie go quiet and had felt the specific anger that is not hot but cold, the anger that lives in the jaw and the hands and does not leave when you unclench them. She did not think about Curtis more than she had to. This was a discipline she had developed during the last 3 years of the marriage, when thinking about Curtis meant thinking about the distance between what he said he would do and what he actually did. And the distance had grown so large that bridging it required more energy than she had available. She had learned to redirect, to identify what she could control and place her attention there. What she could control now was what happened next. What happened next was the problem. She had been out of the workforce for 9 years. This was not a failure. It was a decision she and Curtis had made together when Birdie was born, and the cost of childcare exceeded what Colleen earned at the clerk position she had held at the county records office since she was 24. She had left that job with a plan, and the plan had been that she would return when Birdie was in school full-time, and that the years at home would be years that counted for something when she did. The years had counted. 2 daughters who were healthy and loved and knew how to sit at a table and talk to each other and to adults, and who read books and completed homework without being told, and who understood because Colleen had taught them through years of patient repetition that kindness was not weakness and that paying attention to people was not a small thing. The years had counted for that. They had not counted for much on a resume in Harlan County, Kentucky, in the year she found herself 42 and starting over in a region where the cold jobs were gone and the replacement jobs were fewer and further between and paid less than the cold jobs had. She had applied for 6 positions in the 3 weeks before the divorce was final. She had heard back from 2. One interview conducted over the phone had ended with the polite and practiced sentence that they had decided to go in a different direction. The other had not called back at all. She was working on it. She would keep working on it. But working on it did not solve the question of where she and Nora and Birdie were going to sleep on Friday night. Her mother, Maeve, was in an assisted living facility in Lexington. This had been the case for 2 years since the morning Maeve had called Colleen from a gas station parking lot, unable to remember how she had gotten there. The facility was clean and kind and cost more than Colleen could contribute to a fact she carried with the particular weight of a daughter who knows what she owes and cannot pay it. Maeve's room was small. It did not have space for 3 additional people. That option did not exist. Her sister was in Michigan, which was too far and too complicated to consider in the short term. Her friends, the ones she had managed to keep through the years of a marriage that had gradually, and then not so gradually, made her social life smaller, had sympathy and small houses and their own difficulties. It was Nora who heard about the trailer. Nora was 14 and had her father's dark eyebrows and her mother's habit of listening to conversations she was not part of, with an attention that missed nothing and revealed less. She came to Colleen 3 days before the move-out date and said in the quiet and measured way she said things that mattered, that she had heard Aunt Darlene mention to Uncle Phil on the phone that there was a trailer sitting empty on their property at the edge of town. Darlene Pratt was Curtis's older sister. She was 47, married to Phil, who sold crop insurance and refereed high school basketball, and had the comfortable bearing of a man whose life had gone more or less according to plan. Darlene had never approved of Colleen. This was not speculation. It was documented in 11 years of holiday dinners, where the warmth Darlene directed at Colleen was the precise temperature of politeness without affection. Colleen had spent 11 years being professional about it. The professionalism had been expensive, costing her something each time that she could not have named, but could feel in the specific tiredness she carried home from every gathering. She called Darlene on a Tuesday evening after the girls were in bed. She had waited until after bedtime because she did not want Nora or Birdie to hear her ask for something from their father's family. There was a version of events in which she did not make this call, in which she found another solution. She had looked at the other solutions. They were not solutions that fit the timeline. So she called. Darlene answered on the fourth ring, with the particular rhythm of someone who has looked at the caller ID and considered not answering, and then decided for reasons that served her own purposes to answer after all. Colleen explained the situation briefly. She did not ask for sympathy. She did not frame it as anything other than the set of facts it was. A woman needed a place to live with her children. There was a trailer that was empty. She was asking about availability and cost. There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was a pause that contained things Darlene did not say, and Colleen could feel the shape of them through the phone, the way you feel weather coming before it arrives. Then Darlene named the rent. 63 cents a week, payable in advance. The number was not a number. It was a message. It was the amount a person names when they want the transaction to carry a weight that has nothing to do with money. 63 cents said, I am doing you a kindness you have not earned. I want you to feel the size of that kindness every week when you count the coins. I want the smallness of this amount to remind you of the smallness of your position relative to mine. Colleen understood every syllable of what 63 cents meant. She said she would take it. She drove out to the trailer the next afternoon alone. She wanted to see it first. She wanted to have whatever reaction she was going to have in private, where it would not land on the girls and become their reaction too. The trailer sat on a quarter-acre of land at the end of a gravel road that turned to mud when it rained, which in Harlan County was often. It was perhaps 50 feet long and had been white at some point in the past 2 decades, the way things are white before weather, and neglect collaborate on a new color that is not gray and not brown, but the particular shade that happens when nobody cares. The aluminum siding had buckled at one corner, leaving a gap wide enough to fit a hand through. The concrete block steps leading to the front door were stacked rather than secured, functional in the way that things are functional when the standard is survival rather than comfort. Inside, the air was closed and stale and carried a faint smell of old carpet and something animal that Colleen hoped belonged to the past. The kitchen had a sink that worked and a stove where 2 of the 4 burners responded to persuasion. The bathroom was complete in its parts, if not in its dignity. The main room had carpet the color of a mistake someone had stopped trying to correct. 2 small sleeping areas occupied opposite ends of the trailer, separated from the main space by doors that did not fully close. Colleen stood in the center of the main room and looked at it for a long time. She thought about the cream walls on Dogwood Lane. She thought about Nora, who would look at this place and say nothing, and process the nothing into something she carried silently. She thought about Birdie, who would find a way to make this an adventure, because Birdie found a way to make most things adventures, and about whether it was fair to ask a 9-year-old to perform that adaptation. She thought about 63 cents. Then she took out her phone and opened the Notes app and began a list. The list had 14 items on it. 4 of them could be done today. She started with those 4. That was how Colleen Whitfield had always worked. Not by looking at the full distance between where she was and where she needed to be, which was sometimes a distance too large to look at directly, without sitting down, but by identifying the next 3 or 4 things that could move her one step closer and doing those. It had gotten her through the lean years of the marriage when Curtis's plans for work consistently outran his follow-through. It had gotten her through the diagnosis when Maeve began to forget. It would get her through this. The next morning, she met Darlene in the gravel driveway. Darlene was wearing sunglasses despite the clouds and holding a coffee she had not offered to share. She had the posture of a woman preparing to receive gratitude and fully intending to enjoy receiving it. Colleen opened her coin purse. She counted the coins into Darlene's palm. 2 quarters, a dime, 3 pennies, 63 cents exact. Darlene looked down at the coins, then up at Colleen. Something moved behind the sunglasses. Colleen's voice was level and unhurried. It's what someone in my situation can afford. She took the key from Darlene's other hand. Thank you for the trailer. She got in the car and drove to get her daughters. Nora, when she saw the trailer, was quiet for a long time. She stood in the yard with her box in her arms and looked at it with the expression of someone reading a document carefully before signing. Colleen waited. She had learned years ago that Nora's silences were not empty. They were full of a thinking that would emerge when it was ready and not before. Then Nora, still holding the box, her dark eyebrows level and serious. What color are we painting it? Something released in Colleen's chest, a tightness she had been holding for weeks that she had not fully realized was there until it was gone. Birdie was already inside. Birdie had been inside for approximately 90 seconds, which was the amount of time it had taken her to climb the concrete block steps, push open the door, and begin a running narration of everything she encountered, delivered at volume through the open door. Mom, there's a closet. Mom, the faucet makes a sound. Mom, there's a window in the back and you can see the whole mountain. They moved in on a Friday. 3 boxes, the rolling suitcase, 2 trash bags of clothes and bedding, and a laundry basket containing the things that had not fit in anything else. Nora carried her own box without being asked. Birdie carried the laundry basket in 3 trips, each trip covering approximately 8 feet, before she had to set it down and adjust her grip. A process she narrated with the cheerful commentary of someone who understands that effort is more interesting when described aloud. That first night, they sat on the floor of the main room and ate peanut butter sandwiches because the table had not arrived yet. Colleen had found one online for $15 being sold by a woman 2 towns over who was remodeling her kitchen and wanted it gone. It was coming Saturday. Until then, the floor. They sat in a circle with a battery lantern between them because the overhead light needed a bulb. Colleen had not yet had time to buy, and the lantern was better anyway. Its light was small and warm and specific. It made a circle rather than filling a room, and the circle contained the 3 of them and the sandwiches and nothing else, and the nothing else was for this one evening enough. Birdie said the sandwiches were the best she had ever had. Nora across the circle caught her mother's eye. The look lasted 2 seconds. It was the look Nora had been giving Colleen since she was 11 years old. The look that said, I understand more than I am saying, and I am choosing not to say it because you do not need me to say it right now. It was the look of a daughter who has decided to meet the situation the way her mother is meeting it, without performance, without complaint, on its own terms. Colleen had always loved her daughters. In this circle of battery light on a floor that smelled of old carpet in a trailer that 63 cents had rented, she felt a quality of that love that was specific and new and would not leave her. Birdie announced that it was like camping. It is like camping. Colleen agreed. The first week was the hardest, not because of the trailer. The trailer was a set of problems, and problems could be listed and addressed. The first week was hard because of the town. Harlan was small enough that information traveled through it the way weather traveled through the valley, arriving everywhere at once and impossible to avoid. People knew about the divorce. People knew about the trailer. People had opinions about both that they expressed in the particular Appalachian way, which was not directly but through calibrations of tone and timing, and the things that were left unsaid in the spaces between sentences. Colleen felt it at the grocery store. She felt it at the school drop-off. She felt it in the specific way certain women looked at her and then looked away. The glance that was not hostile but was not warm either. The glance that said, I have decided what category you belong in now, and I am adjusting accordingly. She did not have time to dwell on it. She was too busy surviving. 2 women who lived on the next road over Gloria and her sister Hazel, both in their 70s, both widowed, both possessed of the particular directness that arrives in women who have lived long enough to stop editing themselves, knocked on the trailer door on the 3rd morning with a plate of cornbread and an offer. They needed help around their houses. cleaning, organizing small tasks that had become harder as the years accumulated. They paid a fair rate. Cash. Was Colleen interested? Colleen was interested. She cleaned Gloria's house on Tuesdays and Hazel's house on Thursdays, and the money from those first 2 weeks went toward paint. She asked Nora and Birdie what color. They debated this with the gravity of people making a decision that would be visible from the road. Nora wanted teal. Birdie wanted yellow. The negotiation that followed was conducted over 2 dinners and a car ride. And Colleen let it proceed without intervention, because watching her daughters negotiate was one of the things that reminded her what the years at home had actually built. The compromise was teal for the body of the trailer, yellow for the door and window frames. On a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after they moved in, they painted. It took all day. Birdie's shirt had a yellow handprint on the front before 9 in the morning. Origin unclear, but strongly suspected. They played music from Colleen's phone balanced on the concrete block steps, and they worked with the rollers and brushes Colleen had bought at the hardware store in town, and the work was physical and repetitive and visible. Each pass of the roller changed something. Each section completed was a section that would not need to be done again. Birdie required supervision around the window frames, where her technique emphasized enthusiasm over accuracy. Nora, on the upper sections with the extension roller, was methodical and precise and covered every inch without gaps. And Colleen watched her from the other side of the trailer and felt the particular pride that is not about accomplishment but about character. The pride of seeing who a person is becoming. By late afternoon, the trailer was teal and yellow and entirely different from what it had been. Birdie said it looked like a beach house. Nora said it looked like something someone had chosen. Colleen stood in the yard with paint on her hands and her forearms and a streak of teal in her hair, and felt for the first time since the Wednesday the divorce was finalized that she was building something rather than losing it. She took a photograph, not for anyone else, for herself, to remember what this day looked like. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Colleen was cleaning the kitchen. The routine had become specific in the weeks since they moved in. Wipe the counter, check. The stove knobs, rinse the sink. She opened the narrow drawer beside the stove, the one that stuck, the one she had been meaning to fix, and pulled harder than she intended. The drawer came out entirely. It came out in her hands with the abruptness of something that has been holding on and has now let go, and behind it, wedged between the back of the drawer cavity and the wall of the trailer, was a manila envelope. It was old. The paper had the particular yellow of something that has been in a closed space for a very long time. The edges were soft. There was no writing on the outside. Colleen sat down at the $15 table and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter handwritten in handwriting she recognized immediately because she had grown up watching it appear on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the notes her mother left on the kitchen counter before school. It was Maeve's handwriting. The letter was dated April 1983. It was addressed to Colleen's grandmother, Louise. Colleen's hands were steady as she read it, though something inside her chest was not. The letter was short. It said that Maeve had arrived in Harlan County 3 weeks ago with a suitcase and $40 and a baby girl who was not yet walking. That she had found a place to stay, a trailer on a piece of land at the edge of town, that a man was willing to rent for almost nothing, that the trailer was not much but it was dry, and it had a stove that worked and a window in the back that looked at the mountain, that she was going to be fine, that she was going to figure it out, that she had started cooking for the neighbors in exchange for things she needed, and that the cooking was going well, because the one thing she knew how to do was feed people, and it turned out that people everywhere needed to be fed. In the margin of the letter, in smaller handwriting, Maeve had added a line that looked like it was written later. Perhaps days, perhaps weeks after the letter was sent, in the particular hand of someone returning to a page with something they had forgotten to say. The place does not make the life makes the place. Colleen read the letter twice, then a third time. The baby girl who was not yet walking was Colleen. This trailer, this exact trailer with its buckled siding and its carpet the color of a mistake and its stove where 2 burners worked. Her mother had lived here, had started here, had begun the life that led to everything. Colleen was in this aluminum box that Darlene Pratt had offered as a humiliation. She sat at the table for a long time. The battery lantern was still on. Its circle of light held the letter and her hands and the surface of the table and nothing else. The next morning, Sunday, she called the assisted living facility in Lexington and asked to speak with her mother. The aide who answered said Maeve was having a good day, which meant that the fog that sometimes descended on her mother's memory had lifted temporarily the way fog lifts in the mountains some mornings, to reveal a landscape that was there all along. Maeve's voice was thin but present. Colleen told her about the trailer, about the teal and yellow paint, about Nora and Birdie. She did not tell her about the 63 cents because there were things a daughter chose to carry alone. Then she told her about the letter. There was a silence on the line, not the confused silence of a mind searching for something it could not find. A different silence, the silence of recognition. Maeve's voice when it came was clear in a way it had not been in months. Clear the way water is clear when it runs over clean stone. Look under the kitchen floor, sweetheart. Third board from the stove. I left something there. Colleen knelt on the kitchen floor that afternoon with a butter knife and a flathead screwdriver. She counted 3 boards from the base of the stove. The third board was slightly different from the others, a shade lighter, as though it had been removed and replaced at some point and had aged at a different rate. She worked the edge of the board until it lifted. Beneath it, in a shallow space between the floor and the trailer's undercarriage, wrapped in a piece of cloth that had once been a kitchen towel, was a notebook. A composition notebook, black and white, marbled cover, the kind sold at any drugstore for less than $1. The cover was soft with age. The binding was intact. Colleen opened it. Every page was full. Maeve's handwriting, the same handwriting from the letter, covered both sides of every sheet. Recipes, dozens of them, written in the particular shorthand of someone cooking from knowledge rather than instruction measurements. Approximated techniques described in phrases rather than paragraphs. Caramelized onions, slow low heat. Patients do not rush the sugar. Cornbread with buttermilk and a cast iron that must be hot before the batter goes in. Soup from whatever is available, which was the recipe Colleen remembered from childhood. The one that changed every time and was somehow always the same. See ya. And between the recipes in the margins, in the spaces where the ingredients ended, and the next recipe had not yet begun, Maeve had written other things, small observations, notes to herself, the dates of things that had happened that she wanted to remember. On the inside of the back cover, in handwriting that was slightly different from the rest, slightly more deliberate, as though the words had been chosen carefully, before being committed to the page, Maeve had written a single line. Everything large begins with something smaller than people think is enough. Colleen sat on the kitchen floor of the trailer that had been her mother's trailer 40 years before it became hers. The notebook was open on her knees. The afternoon light came through the window in the back. The window Birdie had reported on the first day, the one that looked at the mountain, and it fell across the pages in a way that made the handwriting glow. She was not crying. She was doing something else, something that did not have a precise name, something that lived in the space between grief and recognition and gratitude, and the particular feeling of discovering that the road you thought you were walking alone has been walked before, by someone whose footsteps you can still see if you know where to look. Nora appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. She looked at her mother on the floor with the open notebook and the light from the window and the expression on her face. She did not ask what was happening. She came and sat beside her on the floor and looked at the notebook and at the handwriting that belonged to a grandmother she remembered from before the fog. Colleen turned to the page with the caramelized onions. Low heat, patience. Do not rush the sugar. She looked at her daughter. Her daughter looked back at her with the steady dark eyes of a girl who understood that something had shifted and was willing to wait to learn what it was. Colleen's voice was quiet in the small kitchen with the afternoon light. I think I know what we're going to do. The next morning she woke before the girls. She stood at the stove where two burners worked and opened the notebook to the first recipe and began. The first batch of caramelized onions burned. Not slightly, not in the forgivable way that things burn when you are learning. And the margin between golden and ruined is narrower than you expected. They burned completely the sugar in them, turning to carbon on the bottom of the only pot Colleen owned that was large enough for the job, filling the trailer with a smell that was acrid and specific, and that Birdie, standing in the doorway with her backpack ready for school, described with characteristic accuracy as the smell of trying. Colleen scraped the pot clean that evening after the girls were in bed. She sat at the table with Maeve's notebook open to the onion page and read the instructions again. Low heat, patience, do not rush the sugar. The instructions were clear. She had rushed the sugar. She tried again the next morning. The second batch was better. Not right, but better. The onions softened without blackening. They reached a color that was closer to what the notebook described. Though the sweetness was not yet where it needed to be, not yet the deep and layered thing she remembered from her mother's cooking when she was a child, when the smell of onions in the kitchen meant that something good was being built slowly and would be ready when it was ready. She tried a third time, and a fourth. Gloria tasted the fourth batch on a Tuesday afternoon. Colleen had brought a small container to the house on her cleaning day, not as a gift, but as a question. Gloria was 74 and had been cooking in Harlan County kitchens for over 50 years, and had opinions about food that were specific and reliable and delivered without cushioning. Gloria tasted the onion standing at her kitchen counter, with the particular attention of someone who takes the act of tasting seriously. She was quiet for a moment. Then she tasted them again. Gloria's voice carried the directness of someone who had earned it across 5 decades. The heat's still too high at the start. You're cooking them like they owe you money. They don't owe you anything. They just need time. Colleen adjusted. She lowered the starting temperature. She extended the cooking time by 20 minutes. She stood at the stove on a Wednesday morning at 6 o'clock while the girls slept and watched the onions do nothing visible for a long time, and then do something: a slow collapse, a deepening of color, a release of sweetness that built so gradually she could not identify the moment it arrived. It simply was there, and then it was unmistakable. The fifth batch was right. She brought it to Gloria on Thursday. Gloria tasted it, set the spoon down, and looked at Colleen with an expression that contained something more than approval. Your mother could cook like this. Did you know that? I'm learning, Colleen said. Hazel tasted the onions that same week and told Colleen they reminded her of something she could not place: a meal she had eaten once at a church supper 20 years ago that she had never forgotten and had never tasted again. The woman who made it, Hazel said, had been a redhead who showed up one year and was gone the next, and whose name Hazel could not remember, but whose onions she had never stopped thinking about. Colleen did not say what she was thinking. She put the thought in her pocket and carried it home. The idea arrived the way it had in the notebook, the way it had in her mother's life 40 years before. Not as a grand plan, but as an observation. Birdie made the observation because Birdie observed everything, particularly things related to food. They were at the Saturday farmers market in the parking lot behind the Methodist church. Colleen was buying tomatoes because the market was cheaper than the IGA for fresh produce, and the budget had become a discipline. She practiced the way some people practice prayer daily with attention, because the alternative was not practicing it, and the alternative was not available. Birdie had stopped walking. She was standing in front of the row of vendor tables with the focused stillness she produced when something had captured her full attention, which was notable because Birdie's full attention was not easily captured and was never still. Birdie's voice carried the unshakable conviction of a 9-year-old delivering facts. There's no hot dogs. Colleen looked at the market: produce, baked goods, a woman with handmade candles, a man selling sorghum syrup in mason jars, honey, soap, no hot dogs. People like hot dogs, Birdie said. They did. Colleen moved her along, but the observation stayed. It stayed through the drive home. It stayed through dinner. It stayed through the evening when the girls were doing homework at the $15 table, and Colleen was at the counter with the notebook where she kept the budget. The job application notes. The list of things that needed to happen. The list that grew shorter in some places and longer in others, and never reached zero. She had the trailer. It was already distinct. The teal and yellow had made it visible from the road in a way that a gray-brown aluminum box never would have been. She had a kitchen. She had the notebook. She had from the cleaning work a small amount of savings not yet committed to anything. She had mornings free while the girls were at school. She had the components of something. She researched that night after the girls were asleep, sitting in the circle of the battery lantern with her phone and a legal pad. The county health department required a food handler's permit and an inspection. The permit fee would take most of her current savings. The inspection required equipment that met specific standards: a steam table, a hand washing station, a cooler maintained at temperature. The equipment could be assembled second-hand if she was patient and systematic, which she was. Because patience and systems were the two things Colleen Whitfield had in abundance. The farmers market coordinator. A woman named June, who ran the market with the organized energy of someone who had been doing it for 15 years and intended to do it for 15 more, told Colleen on the phone that vendor space was available on Saturdays and that the seasonal fee was $120, which was less than Colleen had feared, and more than she could comfortably spend, and which she would spend anyway because some money was expense and some money was investment, and learning the difference was the thing. She told Nora first. She told Nora the way she told Nora things that mattered directly at the table after Birdie was in bed, because Nora's response would be honest in the way that mattered, rather than enthusiastic in the way that was easy. Nora listened to the whole plan without interrupting. She had the notebook open in front of her. She had been looking at the recipes while Colleen talked, turning the pages with the care of someone handling something that belonged to someone else's history. Then Nora closing the notebook gently, both hands flat on the marbled cover. Grandma's onions, that's the thing. That's what makes it different from every other hot dog. I know. Then do it. 2 words. The 2 words that 14-year-old daughters give when they have considered the situation and arrived at the only conclusion that makes sense to them and are not interested in decorating it with qualifications. The permit process took 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Colleen cooked every morning. She refined the onion recipe until she could produce it consistently, batch after batch. The same depth, the same sweetness, the same slow caramelized complexity that had nothing to do with shortcuts and everything to do with the line Maeve had written on the back cover of the notebook. She found a steam table at a restaurant supply auction in Middlesbrough, used but functional for $60. She found a cooler at a yard sale for $8. She built the setup piece by piece the way the notebook had been written, one recipe at a time, one page after another, each one building on what came before. She named the stand Colleen's. Not because she lacked imagination, but because her mother had sold food under the name Maeve's 40 years ago, and the echo was intentional and the simplicity was the point. The first Saturday at the farmer's market, she sold out by 11:15. She had estimated quantities carefully. She had calculated based on the market's reported foot traffic and added a margin she considered generous. The margin had not been generous enough. The line had formed at 9:30, which was when the market opened, and by 10 it had grown past the honey vendor's table. And by 10:30, Colleen had understood that the calculation was wrong, in the direction you wanted a calculation to be wrong. And by 11, she was rationing without saying she was rationing. And by 11:15, the last hot dog was served to a man in a trucker cap who told her it was the best thing he had eaten standing up. She stood behind the empty steam table at 11:20 with a line of people who had come too late, and a sensation in her chest she identified after a moment as the feeling of something working, not perfectly. Running out was a problem, but genuinely. The thing she had made was good enough that people came and wanted more of it. And that was the only information that told you anything true. Birdie, who had come to the market to help, and whose definition of helping included walking the line of remaining customers and informing them with the confident authority of a press secretary that her mother would have more next week, and that the onions were made from a secret family recipe, and that they were going to want to come early, was performing this role with a commitment that made June, the market coordinator, stop what she was doing and watch with visible amusement. Colleen doubled the quantity the following Saturday. She sold out by 12:30. She tripled it the Saturday after that. She did not sell out. She came close. The math was beginning to work. Everett Hollis appeared on the fourth Saturday. He was not dramatic about it. He was a tall man with sawdust on the cuffs of his flannel shirt and the unhurried bearing of someone who works with his hands and has learned that rushing produces mistakes. He joined the line at 10:15, studied the menu board for approximately 3 seconds, and ordered 2 hot dogs with everything. The decisiveness of a man who has been making decisions since dawn and does not require additional time to make one about lunch. He paid with exact change. This was the habit of someone who knows what things cost and prepares accordingly. Colleen noted it the way she noted things, quietly filing the information in the place where she kept observations about people that might or might not matter later. He stood to the side of the line so as not to block it, and ate with a focused attention that Colleen had come to recognize as the mark of someone actually tasting what they were eating. He was not on his phone. He was not scanning the market. He was eating 2 hot dogs and paying them the respect of his full attention. Then he came back to the front. His voice was unhurried, each word given its full weight. "These are the best hot dogs I've had in Harlan County. The onions especially. What do you do to them? Low and slow and patience. I'm going to need more detail on that at some point." He was not flirting. Or if he was, it was the flirting of a man who has spent 5 years outside the practice and has not remembered the steps. He was being direct because direct was the only speed he seemed to have. "Come back next Saturday," Colleen said. He came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. And by the third Saturday he was arriving at 9:40, which was before the market opened, which required intention. They talked in the brief intervals between customers' conversations, measured in minutes about the town, about the market, about the logistics of a food stand that Colleen was solving in real time, and that he seemed to understand without requiring explanation. Because he ran his own operation and knew what it meant to build something from daily work and daily decisions. He was a carpenter. Callahan and Hollis Renovations, though. Callahan had retired 2 years ago, and the sign on the truck had not been updated because Everett did not consider the sign a priority. He did custom work restorations, the ongoing repair of houses that had been standing in Harlan County since before the coal companies arrived and would be standing after everyone currently alive was gone. His wife had died 5 years ago. He said this on the third Saturday, not as a request for sympathy, but as a fact that explained other facts, the way a carpenter mentions that a wall is load-bearing because it changes what you can do with the room. He had 2 daughters. They lived with him. The younger one was 9. Her name was Birdie. Colleen stopped what she was doing. Her hands went still on the tongs. The line continued to exist. The steam table continued to do its work. But something in the ordinary Saturday morning machinery of the market paused, the way sound pauses in the instant before thunder, not because the world has stopped, but because your attention has. "My younger daughter is Birdie," she said. "She's 9. Everett looked at her. He had the expression of a man encountering a coincidence he does not yet know what to do with. "My older one is Ruthie," he said. "She's 12. They stood on either side of the steam table in the parking lot behind the Methodist church on a Saturday morning in October and absorbed the fact that of all the names available to parents in the English-speaking world, they had independently chosen the same one for daughters the same age. Then Colleen laughed. It came without preparation from a place that had been closed for some time, and had opened without asking permission. The laugh of a woman who has been managing everything carefully and has encountered something that cannot be managed, only experienced. Everett laughed too. His was quieter. The surprised sound of a man who had not expected this particular Saturday to contain this particular thing. My birdie, he said, is going to have a lot of question about this. So is mine, Colleen said. The daughters met 3 weeks later with the inevitability of something that was going to happen from the moment the names were exchanged. Two single parents with daughters who kept appearing at the same market on the same morning eventually produce an introduction because the effort required to avoid it exceeds the effort required to allow it. Nora and Ruthie circled each other with the caution of two people who are aware that adults want them to get along and are not willing to perform it on command. 12 and 14 close enough in age to be possible friends and far enough apart to be uncertain about it. They sat beside each other at the picnic table outside the market and spoke in the careful sentences of people establishing the borders of a new territory. The two birdies required no such negotiation. They discovered within 4 minutes of meeting that they shared a name, a grade, and a mutual conviction that the adults around them were making this more complicated than it needed to be. By the end of the first Saturday, they had established a working partnership in line management, walking the queue together to announce wait times with the matched seriousness of professionals who have found their calling. Colleen watched all four of them from behind the steam table one Saturday in November and felt the specific quality of a moment she did not want to move through quickly. Everett appeared beside her, two empty paper trays in his hand, evidence of his usual order. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear it. Strange, very, she agreed. Good strange. Yes, good strange. By December, the stand had become something that the town had absorbed into its weekly rhythm. People came expecting it. People mentioned it to people who had not yet been. The line on Saturdays had a quality of regularity that was its own kind of success, the success of having become part of how a place works, rather than something happening at the edges of it. Colleen had added 2 items to the menu. Nora's idea. Nora had presented the case at dinner one evening with the thoroughness of someone who had spent a week thinking about it and had data. A corn dog because the market drew families and children wanted corn dogs with a conviction that did not require market research to verify. And a vegetarian option using a plant-based sausage that Colleen had tested and found to her genuine surprise to be good. The additions required a small equipment investment. The return had been immediate. She was also quietly in the evenings after the girls were in bed, building toward the larger thing. She had spoken with the county small business development office. She had spoken with June about year-round vendor status. She had priced the equipment required to convert the trailer into a licensed commercial kitchen, a transformation that was months away and significant in cost, but that existed now as a real number on a real page in the notebook, below a line Colleen had drawn with a ruler, separating the current reality from the future she was building toward. The money was accumulating, slowly with the particular slowness of money earned in small amounts, through daily work but accumulating. Each Saturday at the market added to it. Each Tuesday and Thursday cleaning added to it. Each catering inquiry, and there had been 3 added to the picture of what was possible. She did not talk about it. She worked toward it. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of January, a car she recognized pulled into the gravel driveway and stopped. And a man she had been married to for 11 years got out of it and stood in the yard of the trailer. He had never seen looking at the teal and yellow paint and the window boxes Nora had built from scrap wood and the small garden bed that was dormant now, but that would, when spring came, contain the herbs Colleen had planned for it. Curtis stood in the yard and looked at what his ex-wife had built. And his face contained something that Colleen, who had spent 11 years reading that face, identified immediately. It was not admiration. It was calculation. He had a folder in his hand. He held it the way people hold things they intend to use as leverage, visible, but not yet opened, present, but not yet explained. Curtis's voice had the rehearsed calm of a man who had practiced this in the car. "We need to talk about the girls." Colleen did not invite him inside. She stood on the concrete block steps, which put her at his eye level, and she waited. He talked. He talked about stability. He talked about environment. He talked about what a judge might think about two children living in a trailer on a quarter-acre of mud with a mother whose income came from selling hot dogs in a parking lot. He used the word adequate. He used it twice. He used it the way Darlene had used 63 cents as a weapon shaped like a word. Then he opened the folder. Inside was a petition, filed with the county family court, a request for modification of custody, citing changed circumstances, citing the living conditions, citing the income differential between a man who had moved back in with his mother and was working again, working at what Curtis did not specify, and Colleen did not ask, and a woman who was living in a structure that the petition described in language that a lawyer had chosen carefully as substandard housing. Colleen read the petition standing on the steps. She read it the way she read everything completely before responding. Her hands were steady. The rest of her was not. When she looked up, Curtis was watching her with the expression of a man who expects his leverage to produce the reaction he has planned for. Colleen's voice did not shake. It was the voice of a woman who had learned in 11 years of marriage that the moment you let someone see what they have cost you is the moment they know they can afford to do it again. "You didn't call Birdie on her birthday." Curtis blinked. November 14th. She waited by the phone until 8:30. Then she went to bed. She didn't cry. She just went to bed. The yard was quiet. The mountain behind the trailer was doing what the mountain always did, standing there, indifferent to the things that happened at its feet. "You can file whatever you want to file," Colleen said. "But you should know that every person in this town who has eaten at my table and watched me raise those girls is going to tell that judge exactly what kind of mother I am. And you should know that I have 6 weeks before that hearing, and I have spent the last 6 months learning that 6 weeks is more than enough time to do what needs to be done." Curtis left. The car pulled out of the driveway, and the gravel sound faded, and the yard was quiet again. Colleen sat down on the top step. The petition was in her hand. The notebook was inside on the counter, open to the page where the numbers lived. The numbers that had been growing. The numbers that might not be enough. She sat on the step in the January cold and felt the weight of what had just arrived. Not the petition itself, which was paper, which was a legal process, which could be answered with other paper and other legal processes. The weight of the thing behind the petition, the understanding that Curtis had not come because he wanted his daughters. He had come because he had heard through the efficient information network of a small town that his ex-wife was building something, and the building of it had disturbed something in him that could not tolerate her success. He had come to take. It was the thing he knew how to do. The door opened behind her. Nora. She did not ask what had happened. She had been inside. The walls of the trailer were thin. She had heard. Nora sat beside her mother on the top step and did not speak. She reached over and took the petition from Colleen's hand and set it on the step between them, face down, so the words were not visible. Then Nora put her head on her mother's shoulder. She had not done this in over a year. She was 14, and the age of 14 does not generally include putting your head on your mother's shoulder on concrete steps in January. But she did it now. They sat like that for a while. The mountain did not move. The light changed the way January light changes in the late afternoon, not fading so much as thinning, becoming less certain of itself. Colleen put her arm around her daughter. Inside, Birdie was singing something. The sound came through the thin walls of the trailer, indistinct, more melody than words. The absent singing of a 9-year-old who does not know she's being listened to, and is singing simply because the impulse to sing has arrived and she has not yet learned to question it. Colleen listened to her younger daughter sing and felt her older daughter's weight against her shoulder, and looked at the petition face down on the step, and at the yard she had cleared, and the trailer she had painted. and the mountain that was still there, as it always was, as it always would be, regardless of what happened in the 6 weeks between now and the hearing. 6 weeks. She had 63 cents and a notebook full of recipes and 2 daughters and a town that was beginning to know her name. She had started with less. The 6 weeks moved the way 6 weeks move when every day contains something that must be done and cannot be postponed. They moved with weight and purpose and the particular speed of time that is being used completely. Colleen did not slow down. She did the opposite of slowing down. She did what the notebook had taught her, what the onions had taught her, what the years of managing a household on insufficient money with insufficient help had taught her. She identified what needed to happen. She made a list. She started with what could be done today. The list had 2 columns. The first column was the business. The second column was the hearing. The 2 columns were, she understood, the same column. The hearing required her to demonstrate financial stability. Financial stability required the business to grow. The business growing required her to do more of what she had been doing, only faster, only with greater intention, only with the awareness that the margin between enough and not enough had narrowed to 6 weeks and was narrowing further. Every morning she woke up. She added the corn dog to the Saturday lineup during the first week. Nora had sourced the batter recipe from a cooking website and tested it in the trailer kitchen on a Wednesday evening, producing results that were on the first attempt imperfect, in a way that was instructive, and on the third attempt good. The corn dogs sold. They sold to the families with children who came to the market and whose children wanted what children have always wanted at outdoor markets, which is food on a stick. She added the vegetarian option during the second week. This sold more slowly, but it sold, and the people who bought it came back, which was the metric that mattered. She called the Harlan County Founders Day Committee. The woman who answered, whose name was Estelle, and who had been organizing Founders Day for 22 years, said she had heard about Colleen's stand from June at the farmers market and had been planning to call. Could Colleen provide food for the festival in April? The rate Estelle quoted was fair. Colleen said yes. Then Estelle gave her 2 more phone numbers. A woman who organized the church picnic circuit in the spring. A man who coordinated the county fair vendors. The network was not something Colleen had built. It was something that had built itself around what she was doing. The way water finds its way around a stone, not because the stone directs it, but because the water is moving and the stone is there. She kept a ledger. She had always kept a ledger through the marriage, through the years of stretching what they had. But this ledger was different. This ledger was hers entirely. Every number in it belonged to work she had done, and money she had earned, and decisions she had made without consultation, without permission, without the particular exhaustion of explaining her reasoning to someone who was not going to follow the reasoning anyway. The numbers were growing. Week by week, Saturday by Saturday, they were growing. Everett helped. He helped the way he did things practically without announcement, without creating an obligation that would need to be balanced later. He rebuilt the folding table legs on a Sunday morning so the table no longer wobbled. He installed a small shelf inside the trailer's serving window so Colleen could stage orders without reaching behind her. He assessed the trailer's structure with the professional eye of a man who understood what was sound and what was not, and told her which parts of the commercial kitchen conversion could wait and which could not. He did not charge her. When she raised the subject for the second time, standing in the yard on a cold February afternoon, while the girls were inside doing homework, he looked at her with an expression she had come to recognize as the expression he wore when something was obvious to him, and he was trying to understand why it was not obvious to everyone else. Colleen, you feed me the best hot dogs in Eastern Kentucky every Saturday. My daughter has a best friend for the first time since her mother died. I'm standing in a yard that didn't have grass 4 months ago, and now it does because you put it there. If you try to pay me for this shelf, I'm going to be offended in a way that will take me several days to get over. She did not try to pay him for the shelf. The hearing was scheduled for the last Tuesday in February. Colleen prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, thoroughly, systematically, with the attention to detail that had kept her household running for 11 years, and that had, in the months since the household ended, turned out to be transferable to every other domain she had applied it to. She organized the ledger. She compiled the income records. She gathered the documentation of the permits, the health inspection results, the vendor agreements, the catering contracts. She assembled them in a folder with tabs because Colleen Whitfield was the kind of woman who used tabs, who believed that organization was a form of respect for the person who would be reading what you had organized, in this case a judge. And then something happened that she had not organized for. Gloria appeared at the trailer on a Monday evening, the evening before the hearing, with an envelope. Inside the envelope were letters, 11 of them, written by people in the town. Gloria and Hazel had asked quietly, without telling Colleen, without making it a production. They had asked the people who knew Colleen, the people who came to the market, the people who had watched her paint the trailer and plant the garden and show up every Saturday regardless of weather, and raise 2 daughters in a space that would have defeated most people and that had not defeated her. The letters were not long. They were not composed by lawyers. They were written by hand, most of them, on notebook paper and stationery, and in one case on the back of a church bulletin. They said what the people who wrote them had observed. They said it in the particular plain language of people who are not accustomed to writing things down, but who felt that this was important enough to do it. Colleen read them at the table that night after the girls were in bed. She read all 11. She did not cry until the 9th one, which was from June, the market coordinator, who had written 3 sentences that said more in 3 sentences than most people say in 3 pages. She finished reading the 9th letter and set it down and put both hands flat on the table and allowed herself the specific luxury of being for 2 minutes. A person who is overwhelmed by the evidence that she is not alone. Then she put the letters in the folder, behind the last tab. The courtroom was in the county courthouse on Main Street, a building Colleen had driven past 1,000 times and entered twice before, both times to file paperwork. The hearing was in a room on the 2nd floor that was smaller than she expected and quieter than she expected, and that smelled of old wood and the particular institutional cleanliness of a space that is maintained by people who take the maintaining seriously. Curtis was there with the lawyer. The lawyer was a man from Pikeville in a suit that fit well and shoes that were polished, and who had the bearing of someone who did this regularly and approached it with professional efficiency. Curtis was wearing a tie. Colleen had not seen him in a tie since the last wedding they had attended together 3 years ago, and the tie created in her a feeling she did not expect, which was sadness. Not for the marriage, for the performance, for the fact that Curtis believed a tie would change what was true. Colleen did not have a lawyer. She had the folder. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and the patient expression of someone who has heard a great many stories in this room and has learned to listen for what is true underneath what is being said. She reviewed the petition. She reviewed the documents Colleen had provided. She asked questions in a voice that was neither warm nor cold but precise. Colleen answered each question the way she answered questions, completely and without embellishment. She described the trailer. She described the income. She described the market, the catering, the growth. She presented the numbers. The numbers were not large. They were real. They were documented. They were growing. The judge asked about the living conditions. Colleen described them accurately. She did not minimize the trailer. She did not pretend it was something it was not. She said it was small and it was theirs and it was maintained. And it was safe, and her daughters were fed and clothed and attended school and did their homework and were loved. And that the loving was not a thing she could document in a folder, but that it was the most real thing she had. Curtis's lawyer made the case for modification. He used the words from the petition: substandard, adequate, stability. He used them with the professional smoothness of a man who has used these words before and knows where to place them for effect. The judge listened. She made notes. She looked at Colleen over the reading glasses. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Darlene Pratt walked in. She was wearing a good coat, and she was carrying nothing. And her expression was the expression of a woman who has been sitting in a car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, deciding whether to come inside, and has now come inside and is committed to what happens next. Colleen did not understand why Darlene was there. Curtis did not appear to understand either. His lawyer looked at Darlene with the blankness of a man encountering an unscheduled variable. Darlene addressed the judge. She identified herself as the petitioner's sister. She said she had something relevant to say. The judge, with the measured patience of someone who prefers more information to less, allowed it. Darlene did not look at Curtis. She looked at the judge, and she spoke with a directness that Colleen had never heard from her before. A directness that had nothing behind it except what she was saying. She said that she had rented the trailer to Colleen. She described the condition it was in when Colleen arrived. She described the condition it was in now. She said that she had watched from the distance she had maintained a woman take a place that was not fit for storage and turn it into a home where 2 children were thriving. She said that she had visited the farmer's market twice unannounced and had observed the operation and the line and the way Colleen's daughters worked beside her. She said that she had rented the trailer for 63 cents a week and that she had done so for reasons she was not proud of, and that the woman who had accepted those terms and paid them without complaint every single week had demonstrated more about her character in the paying of 63 cents than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. She said that Colleen Whitfield was a good mother. She said it simply without performance, and then she sat down. The courtroom was quiet. Curtis looked at his sister. The look contained something that Colleen recognized from the years of the marriage, the expression Curtis wore when a situation had moved beyond his ability to manage it. He looked at his lawyer. His lawyer's face was professionally neutral in the way that professionally neutral faces become when the professional assessment has changed. Curtis withdrew the petition. He did it through his lawyer in language Colleen did not fully follow, because the language was legal and procedural. But the meaning was clear. He was withdrawing. The modification request was dropped. The hearing ended in 11 minutes. Outside the courthouse on the steps in the February air that was cold and bright and carried the particular quality of winter light in the mountains when the sky has cleared and everything is sharp, Colleen stood with her daughters. Nora was crying. Colleen had not seen Nora cry since the week Curtis left. The tears were quiet and specific, the tears of a 14-year-old who has been holding something for months and has been given permission by the outcome to release it. Birdie, who had been waiting in the hallway with Gloria during the hearing and who had been told what happened in the simplified terms appropriate for a 9-year-old, looked up at her mother with the expression she wore when she was about to say something that she considered important. Birdie's voice was matter-of-fact, as though stating something everyone already knew. Can we go home now? Home was the trailer. Home was teal and yellow. Home was a stove where 2 burners worked and a notebook on the counter and a window in the back that looked at the mountain. Yes? Colleen said, let's go home. Darlene was standing by her car in the parking lot. Colleen walked to her. They stood facing each other in the cold, 2 women who had spent 11 years on opposite sides of a family and who were now standing in a parking lot after something neither of them had expected. Darlene did not apologize. That was not what happened. What happened was smaller than an apology and larger than an apology. Darlene reached into her coat pocket and took out 3 coins, 2 quarters a dime, 63 cents. She placed them in Colleen's palm. Colleen looked at the coins. She looked at Darlene. Darlene's voice was rougher than usual, the rough of someone speaking through something she had not fully processed. You paid me every week. I never spent them. I couldn't. I kept every one. They stood with the 63 cents between them in Colleen's open hand. And what passed between them was not forgiveness, because forgiveness is a word for something that takes longer than a moment in a parking lot. But it was the beginning of forgiveness, the first board being lifted, the first look at what is underneath. Colleen closed her hand around the coins. Spring came to Harlan County the way it always came, slowly, and then all at once the dogwoods blooming white along the ridgelines, and the rhododendron coming in behind them, and the grass greening in the yards and along the roads, and in the small rectangle beside the trailer that Colleen had seeded in the fall, and that was now in April, thick and even and real. The Founders' Day festival was held on the last Saturday of the month. Colleen had prepared for 2 weeks. She had calculated quantities with 6 months of data behind her. She had recruited her full team. Nora on the prep table, efficient and unflappable. Birdie and Everett's Birdie on line management, a partnership that had become a local institution. Ruthie helping where Ruthie was needed, which was everywhere. Because Ruthie had turned out to be the kind of 12-year-old who sees what needs doing and does it. Everett was there at 7:30 to help set up. He worked beside Colleen in the early morning light, assembling the table, connecting the steam table, arranging the setup in the configuration he had designed. And she had refined the two of them, moving around each other, with the ease of people who have learned each other's rhythms without discussing them. By 9, the line was 8 deep. By 10, it was past the honey vendor and the sorghum man and the woman who sold quilts from a card table. By 11, Colleen was in the focused state where the work became automatic, and the hands did what they knew, and the mind was free to notice other things. She noticed the 4 girls at the picnic table. The 2 birdies side by side, heads together over something on a phone. Nora and Ruthie beside them, talking with the ease that had replaced the caution of their first meeting. 4 daughters who had been strangers 7 months ago, sitting together in the April light, with the unself-conscious comfort of people who belong to each other's lives. She noticed Gloria and Hazel in the line regulars who came every Saturday and ordered the same thing and stayed to visit, and who had become, without anyone naming it, something closer to family than to neighbors. She noticed June watching the line from across the market with the expression of a woman who has run a market for 15 years and knows what it looks like when something is working. She noticed Everett at the side of the stand finishing his 2 hot dogs with the same focused appreciation he had brought the first time he appeared 6 months ago, when none of this existed yet. He caught her looking. He raised the hot dog slightly, the gesture of a man acknowledging that the thing in his hand was excellent, and that the woman who had made it knew it was excellent, and that the acknowledgement did not require more than this. Colleen served the next customer, and the next, and the next. She asked each one what they would like, though by now she could predict most orders before they were spoken. She asked anyway, because asking was the thing, because the person in front of you deserved to be the one who said what they wanted, rather than having it assumed. Because that was the difference between a transaction and something that felt like being seen. At 2 o'clock, during a brief lull, she stepped to the back of the trailer. The notebook was on the shelf Everett had built open to the onion recipe, the page she turned to every morning when she started the batch. Maeve's handwriting, the measurements, the method, the patience. And beside the old instructions in Colleen's own handwriting, the notes she had added over the months. Small adjustments, observations, things she had learned by doing that the notebook had not contained because they were hers to discover. 2 generations of handwriting on the same page. The recipe that had started in this trailer 40 years ago and had come back to it and was now going out from it again into the town, into the line of people who came every Saturday, into the life Colleen was building 1 week at a time. She reached into the pocket of her apron. The 63 cents was there. She carried them now, not as a reminder of what Darlene had meant by them, but as a reminder of what she had done with them. A coin purse emptied at the beginning. A palm opened at the end. The same 63 cents, and everything between them changed. She put the coins back in her pocket and returned to the window, and looked at the line and at the town beyond it, and at the mountain beyond the town. The mountain that had been there before any of them, and would be there after. And she felt the particular feeling of a woman who is standing in the place she's supposed to be doing, the thing she's supposed to be doing, not because the place is grand or the thing is large, but because both of them are hers. The afternoon light came through the serving window, and fell across the steam table and across her hands and across the notebook on the shelf behind her. And the light was warm and specific, and it smelled of caramelized onions, low and slow and patient. The smell of something that cannot be rushed. The smell of something that is ready because it was given the time it needed to become what it was always going to be. If you have ever started over with less than people thought was enough, if you have ever held something small in your hand and known it was the beginning of something you could not yet see, if you have ever watched your children help you build a life and understood in the building of it exactly what you were building it for, this story was already yours before we told it. We are grateful you walked this road with us tonight. Before you go, we would love to hear from you. What is the smallest thing someone ever gave you that turned out to be the biggest? Tell us in the comments. We will see you in the next story.